All right, so here is the picture of the lytic cycle. This is on page 370, and you're not going to be labeling this picture either, but you definitely need to know the correct order of the steps of the lytic cycle, and then you need to know what's happening in each step, which for the most part, the name kind of tells you what's happening. So step one is attachment. That's when the virus attaches to the cell. Step two is penetration. That's when the virus penetrates the cell. Number three, biosynthesis. That's when basically the virus takes over the cell and forces the cell to make the viral proteins or the viral enzymes, what have you. Step four, maturation. That's when the viral components are assembled into virions, which is just kind of like baby viruses, basically. You don't really call them baby viruses, but that's what they are. And then the last step, release, that's when the cell explodes, and that releases all the little baby viruses, and then all the little baby viruses can go and infect more and more and more cells. So that's how that works. So again, make sure you know the steps, and make sure you know what happens in each step. So there's also something called the lysogenic cycle. The lysogenic cycle of viruses is viruses that do not readily kill their host cell. Oftentimes they're called temperate viruses. Sometimes the term dormant can be used, like a dormant virus, or there's a couple other different terms for it. I'm trying to think of the other term, and I can't. It's right on the tip of my tongue, and I can't think of it. Oh, I'll think of it at some point. I know it comes up later, too. A latent virus, that's the other term for it. So temperate virus, latent virus, whatever. So what can happen with these type of viruses is that the DNA can actually become integrated within the host cell's DNA, and then it becomes something called a provirus. And then it is possible for temperate viruses to occasionally become virulent kind of randomly for no reason at all. So I absolutely love this picture in the book. This is on the next page, 371. And it's so great because it really does kind of bring everything together, and it shows how these things are kind of intertwined. So on the left, you have the lytic cycle, and on the right, you have the lysogenic cycle. So we already covered the lytic cycle. That's the typical regular kind of life cycle of a virus where it gets inside the cell, infects the cell, and kills the cell. But over here with the lysogenic cycle, so what can actually happen is instead of, so this is the DNA from the virus. So instead of taking over the cell and kind of forcing it to make new viruses, instead the viral DNA incorporates itself within the DNA of the host cell, and that's when we call it a provirus. And then what can happen is as the cell divides, the DNA has to be copied, and then the cell splits into two. Well, when the DNA is copied, the viral DNA is also copied. So after many, many divisions, what can happen is the viral DNA can actually split off and kind of recreate the virus in a way. It's really kind of fascinating. It's kind of scary. It's kind of weird. But it is something that some viruses can do. And this is why, some viruses can remain latent or dormant for, months or even years. And then all of a sudden it kind of pops up again out of nowhere and decides to cause an infection. This is the kind of thing like chickenpox can do this. Herpes viruses can do it. All kinds of different viruses can kind of lay in wait and then just all of a sudden, cause a problem or an issue. So another type of virus is called a retrovirus. Retroviruses have that name because they actually have the ability to do something called reverse transcription. So you should remember from AMP1 that transcription is when you go from the DNA to the RNA. So basically you use DNA to make the mRNA, and then the mRNA goes and leaves the nucleus and finds a ribosome and does, translation. Well, reverse transcription is the opposite. So instead of making RNA from the DNA, we're going to make DNA from RNA. And that's a very unusual, unique ability that only retroviruses have. And they can do it because of an enzyme called reverse transcriptase. Okay? So basically what happens is you have the viral RNA. It is used to make viral DNA. The viral DNA is then incorporated within the DNA of the host cell. Okay, so now you have the DNA of a host cell that's basically kind of like infected with viral DNA. We call that a provirus, just like we talked about a second ago. Then this DNA goes through the process of transcription and translation. So then this, the viral DNA that's incorporated within the DNA of the host cell, that becomes viral RNA, and then through translation, it becomes the viral proteins. That allows the virus to actually be created by the host cell itself, and then the mature virus will then leave the cell to continue that life cycle, to continue doing what it's doing, which is creating more and more virus. Now, I mentioned this. This is actually really important because one of the main types of retroviruses that you need to know is the HIV virus. This is how HIV infects cells. HIV is a retrovirus. So that's why, the virus, it can take a very long time to actually cause AIDS. It can take, a decade or more for the person to actually start to have symptoms because of, this is a very slow and a very sneaky kind of process that this virus does. And it's, once again, it's an example of, a virus that does not immediately kill the host cell. It just kind of, in a sneaky, kind of secret way of taking over the cell. So, it's important for you to understand because obviously HIV and AIDS is a very serious disease that, you'll have to deal with as a medical professional. All right, so another thing that's really interesting about viruses is the link that viruses have with cancer. So we now know that there are many types of cancer that are actually caused or linked to certain viruses. So I'm sure you all know that cancer is when a person's normal, regular body cells become mutated or changed, and usually what happens is uncontrollable cell division. So you have someone whose normal body cells just kind of suddenly decide, all right, I'm going to misbehave, I'm going to not act right, and I'm going to start dividing. And if they divide and divide and divide, they can become a tumor. That's what a tumor is. It's basically a whole bunch of cancer cells that are dividing at an uncontrollable rate. So some cancers can be traced back to certain genes within our DNA. And those are called oncogenes, because onco means cancer. So basically, we have little portions of DNA inside of us, and if those genes, or if that DNA is activated or turned on, that can be what causes the cancer. So we call those oncogenes. Now, oncogenes can be activated by chemicals. They can be activated just by chance, right? Or they can be activated by viruses. And there's some research that suggests that some viruses can actually be used to target cancer cells for infection. So this is kind of going the opposite route, right? So instead of a virus causing cancer, we may be able to utilize other viruses to target and kill cancer cells. So that's kind of the opposite and kind of like an awesome thing instead of an awful thing, right? So, that's a very promising area of cancer research right now. So an oncogenic virus is a virus that causes cancer. Just, like we mentioned oncogenes before, we have oncogenic viruses. One example, the human papilloma virus, or HPV. So a papilloma is the technical term for a wart. So a papilloma virus causes warts. And there's all kinds of different papilloma viruses out there. But usually when we refer specifically to HPV, we're talking about genital warts, which is an STI. So the HPV, or human papilloma virus, causes genital warts as a disease, but it's also an oncogenic virus because it's been proven that HPV causes cervical cancer and anal cancer. And there's a relatively new vaccine for HPV, and it's supposed to be given to children between ages 10 and 12, the idea being that you give it to them before they're sexually active, because that's usually how you're exposed to HPV, is through sexual contact. Now, not everyone gets genital warts and not everyone will get the cervical cancer. Someone could have HPV and have no symptoms and have nothing, nothing going on with it. But it still has been, shown to cause these types of cancer. The hepatitis B virus can cause liver cancer. And then retroviruses, like we just talked about HIV. HIV is a retrovirus, okay? Retroviruses can cause different types of leukemia and lymphoma. So, big area of cancer research is, dealing with these viruses, figuring out ways to prevent the virus, therefore you prevent the cancer. All kinds of stuff going on right now in this area of microbiology. And obviously it's something you should all, be concerned about and want to know more about, because as medical professionals, as nurses and doctors and all that, you're going to be dealing with cancer, quite often. It's definitely one of the leading causes of death in the United States. And, you have to be knowledgeable about what's going on with cancer research and all the different things they're doing right now. And, believe it or not, a lot of cancer research does involve different things with microbiology. All right, so we're going to go ahead and stop there because I don't think I have, I'm almost done with this PowerPoint, but I don't think I have quite enough time to finish. So we're going to have one more video, and then we will be good to go with Chapter 13.